Have you ever felt your chest about to explode from all the words you never got to say? When a relationship ended in bitterness? Our first instinct as human beings is usually to seek justice for our emotions. We crave the chance to explain, to defend ourselves, to make the other person fully understand the pain they caused. We torture ourselves searching for a clear ending, an apology, or, at the very least, an admission that we were right. But imagine a completely different scenario. Instead of screaming or sending long, desperate messages, you choose an action that is far more powerful, more haunting, and more ruthless to the other person's ego. Absolute silence. When you don't respond, when you don't explain, you create a vast, empty space inside their mind, forcing them to spin in circles around everything that was left unsaid. In this moment, silence is not weakness. It is a decisive, disciplined act that reveals extraordinary self-control in the middle of emotional chaos. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius once wrote in his journal a line that has echoed through history. "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In today's video, we are not going to talk about psychological tricks to win someone back. We are going to explore why refusing to give an explanation is actually the highest form of self-respect and inner strength. This is the moment you take back control of your own story and allow your silence to become more haunting than any words you could ever say. Today, we're going to step into a journey to explore a powerful, yet often misunderstood dimension of Stoicism. It is the art of silence and the decision to withhold a complete ending, what many call closure, from those who do not deserve it. In a noisy world where every emotion is encouraged to be displayed, and constant connection is seen as the standard of living, silence has become rare and almost luxurious. We are often taught that every story needs a happy ending, or at least a gentle, tidy goodbye so both sides can walk away with peace of mind. But real life does not operate like a romantic movie. Not every relationship needs a clear conclusion, and not every departure requires an explanation. When a relationship collapses because of disrespect or betrayal, your refusal to close it neatly and intentionally is not an act of hatred or bitterness. On the contrary, it is a strategy to protect your highest inner peace. It is your way of declaring that you will no longer allow others to control the narrative, that you will not give them the chance to soothe their conscience with empty apologies or meaningless conversations designed only to make them feel better about themselves. We often believe that if we pour out all our thoughts and torment, the other person will finally understand, or that the truth will wake them up. However, sometimes an explanation doesn't set them free the way we hope. It only allows them to escape the reality that they lost something precious without even realizing it. When you try to explain your pain, you unknowingly hand them the power to deny it or minimize it. But when you choose silence, you take that power back. Silence forces them to bear full responsibility for their actions. It becomes a lesson far deeper than any words you could say. In the next few minutes, we won't just learn to be silent as a reflex, but we'll examine silence as an entire way of life. We will break down its core principles to see that not speaking up doesn't mean you are cold. It means you are preserving your own dignity in the midst of emotional turmoil. This is the journey of transforming from a victim of silence into the one who masters it, turning silence into the most powerful mirror through which you gain true freedom in your own mind. To truly understand why silence carries such a staggering power, we need to travel back in time to ancient Greece and Rome. This was the birthplace of Stoicism, a philosophy forged not in the peaceful silence of ivory towers, but in the brutal storms of war, plagues, and human betrayal. Great thinkers like Epictetus, a man born into slavery who discovered absolute freedom within his own mind, and Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful emperor in the world at the time, shared a core belief that became a compass for centuries. They understood that life is a chain of events largely outside our control, especially the actions, thoughts, and behaviors of others toward us. However, the highest power a human being holds lies in their ability to control their own response to adversity. The Stoic knows deeply that not every emotion that rises up deserves a verbal reaction, and that staying silent in the face of provocation or hurt is one of the highest forms of inner discipline. In his classic work, Meditations, Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself, during long nights on the battlefield, to guard his inner fortress, his inner citadel, against the ingratitude and deceit of others. For the Stoics, true peace does not come from trying to please others or seeking understanding, validation, or recognition from the outside. It comes from preserving one's inner dignity, no matter how violently the storms rage outside the doors of the soul. This way of thinking confirms that silence is not weakness or passive surrender, as many people still believe. On the contrary, it is a deliberate act, a rational choice to avoid being dragged into the chaotic whirlpool of emotions created by others. This philosophical foundation is the solid ground on which we can go deeper into the next core principles, where silence transforms from a passive state into a sharp weapon of self-respect and maturity. The first and most fundamental principle we need to deeply understand on this journey is redefining the very nature of silence. Silence as an act of discipline, not an act of escape. In popular culture and everyday advice, we are often programmed to believe that the person who wins an argument is the one who gets the last word, and that the one who stays silent is the weaker one, the one who has no defense, or worse, a coward who doesn't dare face the problem. But when we look through the lens of Stoicism, this idea is completely reversed. We must understand that silence is not the absence of sound or words. It is the full and powerful presence of inner discipline. Why is this such a highly disciplined act? Imagine the emotional storm raging inside you when a relationship has just fallen apart. That is the moment when your self-respect is wounded, your ego is screaming for justice, and your pain is pushing you to fight back. The most primitive human instinct when attacked emotionally is to strike back or to defend ourselves with explanations. You want to prove they're wrong. You want them to see all that you sacrificed. You want to unload every ounce of resentment you've been carrying. Giving in to that instinct is easy. It's like letting yourself be swept away by a flood. But standing firm, clenching your teeth, and holding back every word for the sake of your own dignity, that is what is truly extraordinary. Silence, in this context, is a conscious, decisive act. It reveals your ability to maintain absolute self-control in the very eye of the emotional storm. When you choose not to respond, you are practicing one of the core principles of Stoicism, clearly distinguishing between what you cannot control, the behavior, words, and judgment of others, and what you can fully control, your own response. If you allow someone's provocation or indifference to drag you into a verbal battle, you have unknowingly handed them the remote control to your emotions. At that point, you are no longer the master of your own mind. You become a puppet reacting to the strings of external chaos. In contrast, when you remain silent, you cut those strings. You refuse to participate in a game where the rules are not based on respect. Beyond that, this disciplined silence carries a powerful, invisible, psychological impact. When you argue or explain, you are feeding them information, feeding them reactions, and feeding them fuel to keep the story going in the way they want. But when you don't respond, don't explain, you create a vast, unsettling emptiness. Human beings are inherently afraid of uncertainty. When their words fall into silence and receive no signal back, they lose the anchor they use to interpret your attitude. They don't know what you're thinking, whether you're suffering or whether you have completely dismissed their actions. That silent void becomes a haunting presence, forcing them to fill it themselves, with speculation, doubt, and a restless spinning around everything left unsaid. Another crucial aspect of this principle is how it affirms your self-worth. Many people fear that silence means agreement or surrender, that staying quiet is accepting the short end of the stick. But in reality, desperately trying to explain yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you is what truly lowers your value. Silence, in this case, carries the message, I am no longer willing to shrink myself so that others can feel comfortable or to fit neatly into the story they've created. This is not cruelty or emotional coldness. It is the final boundary of self-respect. You understand that some truths do not need to be proven with words, and your character does not depend on whether the other person acknowledges it or not. Disciplined silence also protects us from future regret. In moments of anger, words can turn into knives that cause wounds that never fully heal, turning us into a version of ourselves we don't even recognize. By choosing silence, we protect ourselves from saying things we don't truly mean and from staining our own minds with toxic hatred. We preserve the purity and nobility of our actions so that later, when we look back, no matter how things turned out, we can still be proud that we did not lose ourselves in our worst moment. In short, this first principle teaches us that silence is a declaration of strength. It is the shield that protects you from manipulation, the anchor that keeps the ship of your mind steady amid violent waves, and the most powerful statement that you are the one in charge of your life. When you are silent, you do not disappear. You are, in fact, showing up in the most complete and majestic way, as someone who has grown emotionally and fully owns their inner world. To truly feel the power of this principle, let's step into a concrete situation that many of us have either gone through or watched someone else endure. Picture the moment right after a painful truth has been exposed. Maybe it was betrayal, lies, or simply a long pattern of disrespect that finally pushed you past your breaking point. At this moment, the other person, maybe out of guilt or out of their habit of emotionally manipulating others, starts reaching out to you. They begin sending long messages to explain, to apologize, or worse, to twist everything and put the blame back on you in order to provoke a reaction. In the usual scenario, what do? You respond point by point. You counter every argument. You show them exactly where they were wrong, how deeply you were hurt. You become a competitor in a verbal ping-pong match, where the ball of responsibility is hit back and forth endlessly. But now, pause and apply stoic thinking to this situation. Imagine that you don't return the ball. You let it drop to the ground and roll into the corner. You don't text back. You don't pick up the phone. You don't block them out of anger, because that is still a form of reaction. You simply end all interaction. At this point, your silence begins to work like a massive, merciless mirror. When they scream, blame, or beg, and receive only stillness in return, they are forced to hear the echo of their own voice. There is no resistance from you for them to grab onto and play the victim. There are no insults from you that they can use to say, "See, we were both wrong." They are stripped of every tool they might use to escape reality. They are left alone, face to face with the ugly words and actions they themselves created. Your silence forces them to look directly into the reflection of their own character, and that is often the image they are most terrified of confronting. Your absence is not empty. It is filled with unspoken messages, sharp and unyielding, that compel the other person to examine their conscience in a way no accusation ever could. Let's look at another metaphor to see more clearly how this is about consequence, not punishment. Imagine your life and your mind as a sacred home. When a guest comes into your house and deliberately smashes your belongings, stains your walls, and disrespects the values that hold your home together, what would you do? Would you stand there and argue with them about why they shouldn't destroy things? Would you spend your energy trying to make them understand how valuable your belongings are? No. The most reasonable and self-respecting action is to escort them out and lock the door. You lock the door not because you hate them, but because your home needs protection. Your silence is the click of that lock. It is a physical and emotional boundary, sending a clear message. You no longer have a place in this space. This is not some malicious punishment meant to hurt them. It is the natural and inevitable consequence of them failing to respect the privilege of being present in your life. If they feel pain when the door closes, that pain is the result of them not honoring the door when it was open, not your fault for finally closing it. Moreover, silence acts as a powerful filter. In moments when you are being provoked, the other person often secretly wants your rage so they can justify their behavior. They want you to lose control so they can say, "See, he, she is crazy too." By staying silent, you refuse to give them that satisfaction. You keep yourself in a higher position, not out of arrogance, but because you understand that not everyone deserves access to your emotions. Like a river flowing around a rock in its path, you don't try to break the rock, you don't argue with it. You simply move around it, continuing your journey toward the ocean, leaving the rock behind, cold and unmoving. It is through this kind of silence that you teach others how to treat you. You show that the price of hurting you is not a dramatic argument, something they might still win or walk away from feeling justified, but the permanent loss of connection with you. And believe me, for the human ego, being completely ignored leaves a deeper scar and a longer-lasting echo than any curse or insult ever could. Silence, when used correctly, is the loudest roar of self-respect. Next, we move to the second core principle, a concept that completely contradicts the usual psychological advice you see on social media or in romantic dramas: the power of refusing closure. In modern culture, we are obsessed with the idea of a clear ending. We are taught that in order to heal and move on, two people need to have one last conversation. We believe we must sit down over a cup of coffee, clear up all misunderstandings, offer forgiveness, and wish each other happiness in order to be considered mature and civilized. We crave this thing called closure, like a sedative for a soul that is bleeding. However, from the perspective of Stoicism, this can sometimes be one of the most dangerous emotional traps we set for ourselves. This second principle firmly declares, not every relationship deserves a beautiful ending, and more importantly, not everyone deserves your goodbye. So, what is the true essence of refusing closure? It is choosing to let the story end in uncertainty for the other person, while you still find completeness within yourself. It is when you finally realize that trying to find a reasonable explanation for someone's unreasonable behavior is a futile effort. When a person has chosen lies, betrayal, or prolonged disrespect throughout the relationship, expecting one final moment of honesty from them is unrealistic. Any explanation they offer at this point, if they offer one at all, is usually just a polished justification to ease their own conscience, not to heal you. Refusing to give a clear ending is not a petty or childish act of revenge. On the contrary, it is a high-level defense strategy to protect your inner peace. Look deeper into the true motive behind those one last talks. Most of the time, the one who did wrong desperately wants that final meeting. Why? Because they want to see that you're okay, so they can feel less guilty. They want to hear you say, "I forgive you," or "I understand," so they can sleep better at night, believing they're not the villain in this story. They want a smooth, tidy ending, so they can wrap the past up neatly and store it away in the drawer of memory. When you refuse to give them that, you are refusing to be their emotional dumping ground. You refuse to legitimize their wrongdoings with misplaced kindness. You keep control of the narrative by not allowing them to place the final period wherever they please. Your silence and the unresolved ending are your way of saying, what happened cannot be erased or softened by a single conversation. You force them to live with the unfinished script, with questions that will never be answered. It is this unfinished state that blocks them from gaining the fake sense of peace they are chasing. Furthermore, this principle rests on a deeply Stoic understanding of the value of time and presence. Seneca, one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, reminded us of the brevity of life and the tragic waste when we spend our time on meaningless things. When you spend hours, days, or even months trying to explain yourself, trying to dissect right and wrong with someone who does not value you, you are squandering your most precious asset, your life. There are people who, through their actions, have already forfeited the right to hear your voice. If they did not respect your presence when you were still there, then there is no reason for you to gift them with your attention once you've walked away. Leaving in silence, cutting off contact without a grand announcement. That is how you reset your sense of worth. You are declaring that your time and emotional energy are reserved for those who deserve them, and that the door into your world has closed for good. Many people fear that if they don't explain clearly, the other person will misunderstand or think badly of them. But Stoic thinking teaches us that we cannot control the thoughts of others. No matter how carefully you explain, someone who wants to misunderstand you will still misunderstand you. Letting go of the need to be understood by those who are determined not to understand is the key to freedom. When you refuse closure, you are practicing the highest form of letting go. You no longer need their confirmation to know whether you were right or wrong. You no longer need their remorse to feel soothed. You quietly close your own door, lock it with self-respect, and leave them outside with the unfinished narrative they must wrestle with on their own. In the end, refusing closure is a powerful declaration of personal sovereignty. It is not running away from responsibility. It is the clear recognition that your only true responsibility now is to heal yourself, not to act as a moral teacher or therapist for the one who hurt you. By holding back the final words, you hold on to your power, turning your silence into a haunting legacy the other person will never be able to forget. To bring this powerful principle of refusing closure into reality, let's step into a metaphor. The unfinished book. Imagine your life as a vast library, and the relationship you just went through as a novel you spent a lot of time reading. But the further you read, the more you realize how toxic it has become. The words on the page start to insult your values. The plot turns irrational and is filled with deception. In that situation, what would a wise and self-respecting reader do? Would you force yourself to devour every last line, enduring the discomfort just to see how it ends? Would you feel obligated to write a long letter to the author, analyzing how badly they wrote the story? The answer is clearly no. The most decisive and powerful act in that moment is to close the book immediately, put it back on the shelf, or even throw it in the trash and walk out of the room. You don't owe that book an explanation. You don't owe the author a literary critique. The fact that you stopped reading is, in itself, the most complete message. Your silence is the final, bold period that needs no ink. Now apply this to a real relationship. When the other person, the one who hurt you, desperately wants one last meeting to talk things through, what they really want is for you to help them write the final chapter. They want a dramatic, tearful goodbye or a fiery argument so they can feel like the story has a proper structure. But when you refuse to participate in that final act, you leave them with an unfinished script. They are left hanging mid-scene, like an actor standing alone on stage after the lights have gone out and the audience, you, has already gone home. This leads to an incredibly powerful psychological effect that we need to understand deeply: the obsession with things left unfinished. The human mind has a natural craving for completion. We hate puzzles with missing pieces. We hate songs that cut off in the middle of the chorus. When a relationship ends without an explanation, the brain of the person left behind goes into a kind of micro-panic. They have no real data from you, so they're forced to fill in the blanks themselves. That's when their nightmare begins. In the absence of feedback, their mind automatically starts generating thousands of imaginary scenarios. They begin to ask themselves, why is she so calm? Did I mean nothing at all? Why isn't he angry? Did I lose someone who was actually too kind for me? In that ambiguity, they start to blame themselves, torment themselves, and judge themselves far more harshly than any accusation you could have thrown at them. If you yelled at them, they could push back and tell themselves you're crazy or cruel, but in the face of your cold silence, they have nothing to shield themselves with. They are forced to confront the monster inside their own thoughts. Let's look at another real-life image: the empty chair at the party. Suppose your ex invites you to an event or tries to pull you into a group conversation just to gauge your reaction. If you show up and look miserable, they win. If you show up and act fake happy, they still see how hard you're trying. But if you simply don't show up, don't answer, and leave behind an empty chair, that empty chair becomes the center of attention. Your absence becomes louder than any presence. They will look at that empty space and feel the weight of what's been lost. This ending without words creates the longest-lasting echo. People often quickly forget arguments, but they can be haunted for a lifetime by a silence they can't explain. They live with a persistent regret because they never get to know what you were truly thinking at the end. That mystery transforms you from just an ex into a powerful ghost in their mind. They will continue writing their story. But in that version, you remain a permanent question mark. Someone they can never quite reach or decode. And most importantly, this refusal robs them of the chance to play the victim. If you give them closure, they can tell their friends, "We broke up peacefully. We were both at fault." But when you go completely silent and disappear, they cannot tell that story so smoothly. They are forced to face the truth. They pushed you so far away that you no longer wanted to give them even a final glance back. That is a heavy blow to the ego, one that forces them to begin a serious self-examination. Something soft, comforting explanations could never accomplish. We've already walked through the discipline of silence and the power of refusing to give an ending. Now, we step into the third core principle, the deepest and most transformative aspect of Stoicism in relationships. Silence as a mirror of truth and a catalyst for self-awareness. Normally, when we are hurt, our greatest desire is to teach the other person a lesson. We want to use sharp words to point out their mistakes, to dissect their behavior so they can see just how terrible they've been. We believe that if we speak enough, deep enough, and painfully enough, they will finally wake up. But the harsh reality is that in most cases, words are just noise. The more you try to explain, the higher their natural defense mechanisms rise. They'll be busy building arguments to refute you instead of listening to you. They'll focus on your angry tone rather than the message you're trying to convey. In the end, the conversation becomes a fog that hides the truth. This third principle teaches us a completely different approach. Silence is not disappearance, it is a mirror. We need to understand this correctly. When you withdraw and maintain absolute silence, you are not creating meaningless emptiness. On the contrary, you are creating a deadly quiet space where all distractions are removed. In that space, the other person has no one left to blame, no one left to argue with, and no one left to cast as the villain so they can feel like the victim. They are left alone, with themselves. Your absence becomes a reflective surface, forcing them to confront their own character, their ego, and the damage they've caused. In this way, silence operates as the most profound communication tool, far beyond the limits of language. Words can be twisted, misunderstood, or forgotten. But the feeling of being left alone with silence cannot be rationalized away. It is, in itself, a firm declaration, an unbreakable boundary, and a wordless lesson. It tells them that their behavior has crossed a line so far that it is no longer worthy of any response. This kind of silence not only ends a relationship, it initiates an inner transformation process for the other person, if there is still any seed of conscience left in them. Why is this real growth? Because human maturity rarely comes from being criticized by others. It comes from the painful awakening within. Not receiving closure, not receiving forgiveness, or even blame, forces a person to turn inward for answers. They have to ask themselves the hard questions they previously ran away from. Your silence strips them of the right to be comforted falsely, pushing them into a small existential crisis where they must take full responsibility for the collapse of the relationship. Many people think silence is cruel, but from a Stoic perspective, it is actually enabling wrong behavior through constant dialogue that is cruel. To yourself, and to the other person's growth. Sometimes, explanations don't free them, they only allow them to go on avoiding the reality that they have lost someone genuine. Silence is what makes them carry the full weight of the consequences. It's the only way they can learn the lesson of appreciation, a lesson that can only be taught through the pain of real loss, not through gentle warnings. Moreover, this reflective silence helps you detach yourself from their story. You are no longer the clingy ex or the dramatic one in their narrative. You become a mysterious figure, someone with towering self-respect whom they were simply not capable of keeping. Silence declares that you have completed your role in their life, and now the stage belongs entirely to them to continue their one-man show. You are not punishing them. You are merely returning them to their true selves. In the end, this principle affirms a powerful truth. Truth does not always need to be spoken. Some truths can only be felt through absence. When you are silent, you are giving them the only real chance to see themselves clearly in a mirror that isn't distorted by arguments. It may be an ugly image that hurts them, but it is a necessary truth. And for you, this silence is proof of tremendous growth. You no longer need to prove you're right, because your peace matters more than winning in a story that's already over. To fully understand how silence works as a harsh but fair teacher, let's look at a deep metaphor: removing the safety net. Imagine you're watching someone learning to walk on a tightrope. All this time, every time they slipped or lost balance because of their own carelessness, you were always there. You were the safety net beneath them. You were the explanations, the forgiveness, The long conversations, dissecting right and wrong, lifting them back up, softening every fall. Every word you spoke, whether it was criticism or comfort, actually worked like a supporting force, keeping them from ever touching the hard ground of reality. Because they knew there was always a net, they never truly learned to be careful with their steps. They took your presence and your patience for granted. But when you decide to practice absolute silence, you're making one decisive move. You remove the net. When they slip this time and fall, no one catches them. There are no messages for them to cling to, no explanations for them to lean on. They collide directly with the cold, unforgiving ground of consequences. That impact will hurt, deeply. But it's in that raw pain that the real lesson finally begins to sink in. For the first time, they feel the full weight of their actions without you cushioning the blow. Your silence forces them to get up on their own, dust themselves off, and ask, "Why did I fall?" If you were still there explaining why they fell, they would only focus on your voice. But when you're gone, they are forced to focus on their own feet and their own balance. Let's go deeper into a real-life example of transformation through empty space. Think about someone who has been using toxic silence, the silent treatment, or vague, manipulative words to control you. In the past, whenever they pulled away, you panicked. You texted nonstop, checked in, apologized even when you did nothing wrong, just to break that silence. You unintentionally taught them that their coldness was a powerful tool to control you. But this time, the script changes. When they pull their old tricks, or when they mess up and wait for your reaction, you respond with thunderous silence. You don't block them in a fit of anger. You don't throw a scene. You simply do not respond. One day passes, a week passes. Your silence stretches on, steady and unshaken, like a still lake without a single ripple. Now the psychological dynamic completely reverses. The other person, once in the position of control, begins to spiral in confusion. They throw stones into the water, hoping to see a reaction, but the surface remains calm. Your silence becomes an invisible but unbreakable boundary that sends a crystal-clear message. Your tactics don't work here anymore. The frustration of no longer being able to influence your emotions forces them to face a brutal truth. They have lost control. And when people can no longer control others, they are finally forced to control themselves. This is where the seed of maturity begins to sprout. They start to understand that respect cannot be demanded through manipulation. It must be earned through sincerity. This silence also acts like the gift of absence. There is a paradox in relationships. Sometimes our presence actually blocks the other person's growth. When we are too forgiving, too eager to explain, we unintentionally rob them of the chance to reflect. It's like a teacher who always reads out the answer the moment a student struggles. The student's mind never develops. Your silence is the moment you take the answer key away. You leave them alone with the hardest exam of their life: regret. They may take a month, a year, or many years to solve that problem. Maybe one quiet night in the future, when the noise of youth has faded, they will suddenly remember your dignified silence and realize that was the moment they lost someone who truly valued them. That late realization, however painful, is real growth. That is the greatest gift you leave them, not hatred, but an unspoken truth that helps them become a better version of themselves for the next person, or simply for their own life. Do not mistake silence for doing nothing. In the inner world, silence is an act of grand construction. You are rebuilding your boundaries, you are rebuilding your self-worth. You are creating a space where truth can stand on its own without being decorated or diluted by words. You are not punishing them with silence. You are giving them the only real chance to face their own conscience, the most honest companion they will never be able to escape. We've just walked together through a long journey of ideas, from redefining silence as an act of discipline to understanding the power of refusing a neat ending. But philosophy will always remain dry ink on paper if it is not carried out onto the battlefield of reality. And what is our reality today? It is a hyper-connected world, where the phone in your pocket is always ready to light up with temptation, where social media has become a minefield of emotions, and where staying silent is 1,000 times harder than it was in the days of the ancient Stoic philosophers. So how do we bring the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus into the digital age? How do we maintain the stillness of a mountain when your fingers are itching to hit send on an angry, emotional message? This is where we need a concrete action strategy, a code of conduct to protect our inner fortress. The first and most important strategy, the art of the Stoic pause. In modern life, quick replies are often equated with care. When we receive a provoking text, a baseless accusation, or even a vague passive-aggressive status from an ex, our biological reflex is to respond immediately. Adrenaline rushes to the brain, the heart races, and we feel an overwhelming urge to type back, to defend our honor, to explain ourselves. But this is the trap. Practice the Stoic pause. The rule is very simple, but it requires extraordinary discipline. When emotions surge, do not act. Set a 24-hour rule, or better yet, a 72-hour rule. Tell yourself, this is an external event. My reaction is my choice. I will not hand over control of my emotions to someone else. During this delay, you will notice something miraculous. The explosive anger that wanted to type paragraphs will slowly calm down, making room for reason. Those long walls of text you were itching to send to dissect right and wrong. After 24 hours, when you reread them, you'll see they are unnecessary and, honestly, a bit weak. You'll realize that sending them won't solve anything, except showing the other person that they still have the power to hurt you. This pause helps you shift from reacting to responding. And sometimes, the wisest response is no response at all. Remember, once words are spoken or messages are sent, they cannot be taken back. Silence keeps you in a safe and dignified position, where you never have to regret a moment of lost control. The second strategy, digital discipline and social media boundaries. We cannot talk about silence in this era without talking about the digital side. Many people think that blocking, unfriending, or deleting a number is childish, cowardly, or petty. They try to keep connections to prove they are mature and fine. But Stoicism teaches us to look at things more realistically. Environment shapes the mind. If you are trying to quit a toxic substance, you wouldn't leave it on your desk within arm's reach. Similarly, if you're trying to heal from a toxic relationship, why would you allow their images, updates, and energy to pop up on your phone every day? Blocking or deleting isn't starting a war. It's mental hygiene. You are renovating your inner home, and you have every right to decide who is allowed to enter. Don't hesitate to implement strict no contact. Silence here doesn't just mean not talking. It means not looking, not listening, not checking. Every time you visit their profile to see how they're doing, you're breaking your own silence. You're reloading painful data into your brain, reigniting old thought patterns and emotional loops. See cutting digital contact as a peace treaty you sign with yourself. It's your declaration. I value my peace more than my curiosity about their life. When you clean up your digital space, silence stops feeling like a burden and starts to feel like spacious air, room for you to breathe and recharge. The third strategy, reevaluating the need to explain and the letter you never send. Deep down, the reason we struggle with silence is that the ego wants to be recognized as right. We're afraid that if we don't speak up, they'll spread lies about us, or that they will never understand how genuine we were. This fear is deeply human. But look at it under the light of truth. If they didn't value you when you were there, do you really think they'll value your explanations once you're gone? Most of the time, the answer is no. Don't throw the precious pearls of your sincerity into the mud of someone's indifference. Instead, redirect that urge to explain inward. A powerful technique is the burn letter. Write down everything you want to say, every resentment, every curse, every psychological analysis, every last bit of love that still lingers. Write it all out. Write until you're exhausted and there is nothing left to write. And then, burn it. The act of writing helps you release emotions from your body, satisfying your brain's need to speak. Burning it is a symbol of letting go. You preserve your dignity by not sending it to someone who doesn't deserve it. And at the same time, you are not suppressing toxic emotions inside. You become your own witness. And sometimes, having yourself truly hear you is enough. You no longer need validation from someone who has already lost the right to hear your voice. After that, silence becomes lighter. Because the emotional weight has been emptied into a safe container that you control. The fourth strategy, redirecting your energy, the sweetest revenge. Stoicism does not teach us to become emotionless stones. It teaches us how to manage emotional energy. Instead of wasting precious energy wondering whether your silence is hurting them, which is still a form of attachment, use that silence to return fully to building your own empire. Remember, the best, sweetest, and most ruthless revenge is not to hurt them, but to live such a radiant life that their existence fades into irrelevance in your memory. Use the time you once spent arguing over text or stalking their social media to reinvest in yourself. Go to the gym, read books, learn a new skill, make money, build real, high-quality relationships. When you commit fully to your own growth, your silence carries a different frequency. It is no longer the silence of a victim hiding in the dark, licking their wounds, but the silence of someone busy building their future. This is when silence becomes magnetism. From a distance, your ex, or anyone who hurt you, might see or hear that you are thriving. Their curiosity will slowly transform into regret. They will ask themselves, how is he/she doing so well without me? And that, right there, is the most powerful answer you can ever give, without saying a single word. The fifth strategy, accepting being misunderstood as the price of freedom. One of the hardest parts of applying this philosophy is accepting that you might become the bad guy in their story. When you go silent and cut contact, they might tell others that you're cold, cruel, or heartless. This is the price of freedom. Marcus Aurelius taught us, I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and I have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature akin to my own. Accept that you cannot control the story they tell the world. Let them play the victim if it makes them feel safe. Truth has a life force of its own. The people who really matter, the ones with depth and wisdom, will look at your actions and your way of living over time, not at one-sided gossip. Don't exhaust yourself trying to correct every rumor or clarify every misunderstanding. Let your silence and your honorable way of life be your defense. When you stop fearing being misunderstood, you reach a state of absolute freedom. You no longer live to please the crowd or to protect a polished, fake image. You live for the truth of who you are. And believe me, there is nothing more compelling and admirable than someone who dares to be misunderstood in order to protect their inner peace. In summary, applying silence and refusing to explain yourself is not a short-term tactic to win a breakup. It is a lifestyle revolution. You begin to set new standards for what you accept and what you refuse to allow into your life. You learn that your time and attention are finite and priceless. Start with small steps. The next time you feel triggered, pause. Breathe deeply. Remember the mirror. Remember the power of removing the safety net. And choose silence. At first it will feel uncomfortable, awkward, even painful, like going through withdrawal, but gradually you will feel an inner strength quietly growing. You will find yourself calmer, clearer, and more in control. You will realize that silence is not emptiness. It is the sacred space where you finally meet yourself again. The strong, resilient version of you that has been buried beneath all the noise of trying to please others. And once you rediscover that self in the stillness, you will understand. You no longer need any explanation from anyone, because your very existence, your way of living, is already the most complete answer you could give to this world. Of course, when we approach this philosophy, we can't avoid criticism. There will be people who argue that going completely silent and cutting off contact is cruel, or even equate it with ghosting, the irresponsible disappearing act so often condemned in modern dating culture. They'll say that a mature, civilized person should always offer a clear explanation, no matter what, to show basic respect for someone they were once close to. But we need to draw a sharp line between cowardly avoidance and legitimate self-protection. Ghosting usually comes from fear of commitment or sheer laziness in communication in casual, low-investment relationships. In contrast, the Stoic silence we're talking about here is a last resort. A boundary enforced only after your limits have been crossed repeatedly, and after every attempt at honest conversation has been ignored, twisted, or weaponized against you. This is not emotional cold-bloodedness. It is the decision to no longer shrink yourself or lower your standards, just so someone else can feel more comfortable with their own wrongdoing. Some people also believe that saying things clearly will bring closure and relief to both sides. But the harsh truth is that sometimes explanations don't set the other person free. They simply help them escape the reality that they've lost something precious. Silence, in this context, is not designed to punish or inflict pain. It is the natural consequence of them failing to respect your presence when they had the chance. If they want a neat ending only so they can control the narrative or soothe their conscience, that is not healing. That is avoidance of responsibility. Your silence, therefore, exists so that they must finally carry the full weight of their own actions. A lesson far deeper than anything you could have ever put into words. The journey of walking through heartbreak and learning how to stay silent has never been an easy path. But through the lens of Stoicism, we've discovered a profound truth. Silence is not a tragic ending or the weakness of a defeated person. It is the beginning of an inner world that is steady and proud. We've seen that it is not sharp words, but disciplined silence that becomes the loudest roar of self-respect, the clearest proof of true maturity. Remember this, people may forget arguments, but they will be haunted for a long time by an ending without words. In that very ambiguity and stillness, they are forced to live with regret and to write the rest of the unfinished story on their own. Don't be afraid of being misunderstood just because you choose not to explain. Those who truly value you will not need an explanation. And those who have already decided not to understand you will find your explanation meaningless anyway. Guard your energy, your dignity, and your peace for yourself. Because maturity is not about forgiving out loud. It is about knowing when to stop and walk away without needing a final goodbye. I want to close this video with a sincere message to you. Don't try to win an argument with your past. Let your silence do its work, and let your new, radiant life become the strongest answer of all. As Epictetus taught, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Be strong, hold your silence, and keep walking toward the light of your own freedom. If you feel that this video has touched a part of your story, or helped you find the strength to let go of what no longer deserves you, please support us by hitting the like button and sharing it with someone who may be in need of healing. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you can continue this journey with us, exploring and growing through deeper philosophical perspectives. Share your own experience with silence in the comments below. We are always here to listen. See you in the next video.